Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome back to another chat with me, Matt Webb from Mentor Group. So today's conversation is going to be around large opportunities and large deals. And what I wanted to understand from someone who's been doing this for a long time is what's changed. So maybe what's changed, not just over the last year and a half during the pandemic, but in the context of selling big ticket deals and opportunities. What's changed over the last years and decades? So no better person to share that insight with us than with one of the founding members of Mentor Group, Neil Kelly, also to this day, one of our directors. Neil, how are you?
I'm good, Matt. How are you? Looking forward to this?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. It was interesting, before we started recording this, you shared that picture on the wall behind you, which was your route from, it was across the ocean, wasn't it, to the States? Just tell that story briefly, because it's fascinating.
Okay. Well, I got involved with a friend of mine who had a lovely boat, a yacht, 60-foot catamaran, and we decided to enter it into a transatlantic race at the end of 2019 from the Canaries to St. Lucia, and it's a 6-person boat, and we had 5 people, 2 of whom couldn't really sail. So it got very interesting.
We made it.
Yeah, we made it. We made it very safely. We were 23rd out of 210, 4th in class. So we were very pleased. Yeah, it was good. Good experience. Yeah.
And people who listen and watch these podcasts, these chats, will know that we don't rehearse them. So the link I'm about to make is purely by luck. In that, if you think about your crossing, and you had 6 people involved, I guess all people had different roles, different responsibilities. I would imagine there's a parallel in what we're going to talk about today, selling big deals.
Yeah, good link. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Not practice.
There is. Of course there is. And the parallel, if you extend it slightly, each person on the boat has very specific roles, and in most cases, you're the let's call it subject matter expert.
Yep.
Somebody else could do it, but you're the lead. But of course, you need everybody. One person can't do it. The operation is too complex.
So let's take that thread for a moment and think about, you've been doing this for a long time now. You've been selling big opportunity items, with customer outcomes in mind for many years. What do you see have been some of the fundamental changes over the years of the way you go about doing that?
I think some of them are things that we're becoming more familiar with now. So, for example, if we go back to, let's say, 80s and 90s, you would see organizations would be far more formal. They would be RFP driven, even RFI, so request for information first. Then they'd go through working out what they wanted, and then an RFP, a request for proposal, which would generate formal bids and all sorts of scoring mechanisms and all sorts of, if you like, risk avoidance tactics. And quite often the actual value of the project would be hidden away. It would be on paper somewhere, but it wouldn't be a driving factor. And I think if we look at the processes more recently, certainly in the last 5 to 10 years, there are the odd RFP we still see, but not very many. And mostly organizations have got a much clearer idea of what the market can offer, and also what they want. So salespeople have a different role to play in the process.
And we'll talk a little bit more about that different role in a minute. I think there are some sectors which still are RFI, RFP driven. Even with that though, maybe the subtle nuance now is you can still play a part in shaping that if you understand your customer, if you've got the right contacts, the right network in place, rather than just receiving that RFI, RFP, by email.
Yeah, I thought about this before we connected on the call, and my experience and my experience of other people who have been successful in large scale deals is that there is a degree of bravery involved on the behalf of the seller. So I think we have to strike higher, and we have to strike in a more challenging and brave way. We can't do what we normally do, what we've normally done. And I think that's about conceptual selling. You have to understand, I know we say this a lot, but you've got to understand the customer's business environment so that you can position yourself as adding some kind of value. And it doesn't just mean improving something by 10% or replacing something with a better version. It often means something far more challenging, far more ambitious at a level of scale, where an RFP, if you like, would come, if there was one, would come much later, because you've actually caused the if you like, the disruption which has made that thing possible.
Right, so let me play that back to you. We need to aim high, but when we do aim high, we've got to aim high with some real thinking, some real context. The word insight is bounded around quite a bit, but you've got to go in there with an opinion of what's going on in their business because you understand it.
Yeah, you can't go in based on questions at that level. You have to have an idea. You have to have a concept, either something that's worked somewhere else or something that you know you can deliver. And we, again, another trendy expression these days is storytelling. Okay, so that's a good concept. I like it a lot. But what's the story?
Yeah.
You know, how relevant is the story to the listener? And that's the skill. So if you've got the concept or you've done it before, then you can build a story around that. And ultimately, the story is what it means to the listener. It has to resonate. Children like fairy stories because they can imagine it happening to them.
Yeah, well, that's right. And we've all been brought up with stories along the way, but we get turned off very quickly if the story's boring.
Yeah, exactly. It's not relevant. It's not. I can't identify with the story or the people in it. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me play the tape on just a way of thinking. If you were doing your trip across the ocean, you've got to work well as a team. But if you don't work well as a team and you have somebody who wants to steer the boat all of the time, they're going to get fatigued, they're going to get tired, and they can't scale. So is there a parallel with that sort of thinking into big deal selling as well?
I think the idea that someone is an integral part, let's say, of an operation. So there's a skipper on a boat, just like there's a CEO in a business. But that skipper is probably not the best person at trimming the sails and will not be able to steer the boat along all the time. They're much more likely to be involved in the equivalent of strategy, which is navigation and sailing strategy. You know, what where's the wind and where are we and how are we going to try and find it?
Yeah.
So you need someone to be doing other things at the same time. So yeah, the parallel stands. But if you were trying to sell that crew a concept of doing something different, which would be major, you'd have to get them all to buy in.
Okay, so this is an important point. So in virtual team engagement, because I agree with you, when you're working on big opportunities, you bring the right people in who's got the right skill set and expertise to help with that proposition. What you're saying is you must be swimming or flying in formation in order to do the right thing for the customer.
Yeah. I think identifying yourself as an outsider, you know, what gives you the right to try and fly in formation, to use that expression? What gives you the right to be on the boat? Well, actually, you have to generate some kind of believability, credibility, that you know what's going on and that whatever you say has a relevance to them. Okay.
So all of this is starting then to mesh together quite nicely. So we've got the right people doing the right role, working together as a team, aiming at the right target senior people with a good story, one that resonates with them. What else do you think is important in modern selling of big opportunities?
Well, I go back to the level of which a lot of what we're describing could be perceived as, I say regulation, but let's say accepted norms for consultative selling, which is, you know, solution selling or whatever the adjective, but people know the same kind of things from the labels. And I think the difference with large deals, to be successful in them and to influence them if they're super large and need a lot of customer involvement in the specification of it, is this concept of bravery. You've got to be pitching high. You've got to pitch big. People aren't going to listen particularly to someone who just want them to do something but in a different color, or, you know, I've got another widget to stick on your engine, or a way of losing a bit of weight off your machine, or whatever it is. It's actually taking a more, using this word disruptive, which I like. It's a disruptive way of looking at something and saying, actually, guys, there's a better way of doing this. And it might be quite radical.
So I know you've done this because I've been working with you for many years now. Give me an example of, desensitized example for confidentiality reasons, of course. Give me an example of where you've been brave, you've pushed You've pushed the agenda for the good of the customer to think differently. Can you give an example of that?
Yeah, sure. We've seen an example in our business where some time ago we were informed by the customer that actually the way that we had worked with them for several years was going to come to an end. They decided that they could better spend their money by recruiting internal resources, and they loved us and loved the work we did, but they were driven by by financial drivers, and they wanted to move on. And we said, okay, fine. So let's think about that in a more radical way. So what would be the cost of that hiring of people? What would be the implications for you, positive and negative? Stand back from the proposition and reevaluate it and say, right, so let's spin it the other way around and say, let's say we did exactly the same provision of service as you're envisaging at the same or maybe even less money, and present it back to you as effectively an outsourced operation of the same thing. And of course, once they realize that over a period of time, taking on staff has a downside because they have a shelf life, and how do they crudely get rid of them, whereas with an external operation it's much easier. They saw the sense of it and said, we hadn't even thought of that. We'd never thought of that approach. And we were able to do a deal with them over 3 years.
So rather than just taking at face value what was being said, you create your opinion, you be brave enough to share your opinion. And it doesn't always work, it'd be fair to say. But
I tell you what, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I think not only did we share the opinion, by the way, but we actually managed to get them to, by being a bit disruptive on the thinking, spin the problem, not change it, but spin it to a different angle and say, why don't you do it this way instead? Or let's have a look at if we could do it this way instead. And of course, once we got them in the dialogue, we managed to persuade them that was a better way. But going back to your point, I think there is a risk of it not working. I think if you're going in high and you're going in a challenging way, sometimes they're going to say no thanks. So it doesn't always work, but you can always revert back to a kind of standard or normal approach. And I think if you've done your research, you've done your insight, and you've got a good proposition, then I think going in high is a good idea.
Well, and again, I think it goes over as a famous basketballer, it might be Michael Jordan, but don't quote me on it, who said, I miss 100% of the shots I don't take. Yeah. So if you're not brave and you don't go in with that, then, well, frankly, you're never going to know, are you?
Yeah, exactly.
So the last sort of area just to ask you about is, what have you seen has shifted in terms of the number of people involved from the customer's side on these big opportunities over the years?
Well, I mean, it depends a little bit on company culture. So, we do work sometimes with very consensual organizations who would de facto involve 10 people, because that's, less than 10 by definition for them doesn't work. But even putting that on one side, there's a general shift to having far more people involved. And you might argue it's a good thing because you've got financial operations, you've got the users, if you like, of the people who are going to be impacted by whatever it is. But there just is the bigger the ticket, the bigger the risk, if you like, and therefore the mitigation of that risk requires other people. But they're very often not the people you would normally sell to. That's important.
Okay, so take that thread then. They're not the normal people that you would normally sell to, which means you have to be slightly different in your approach. What's your best advice then in that circumstance?
Well, leave your products in your bag.
Yeah.
Don't sell them. That's not the point. We're talking here about conceptual stuff. We're talking about, it's an old expression, but stand in the customer's shoes. What does the world look like from where they sit? They're not interested in what's in your bag. Everything we're talking about, it's got to be expressed in terms of their risk, their challenge, their benefit.
Okay, good. So as we come to the end of our chat today, we've talked about virtual team engagement, roles and responsibilities, aiming high, have a story, keep your products in your bag. If you could give one piece of advice, one golden nugget of what you think, if you did none of the above except for one, what would it be?
I think use your imagination. I think you have to have the big picture. Don't be constrained by what you did or what the bloke next to you does every day. Think about the environment you're going into with imagination. Be disruptive. Create a picture that the customer thinks is sexy and attractive.
Comes back to being brave again, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In your thinking, which is where we started off. So if you've got a big opportunity that you're working on, as you've listened to Neil and I talking today, where would your marginal gain be? What one thing would you take away from this chat that is going to help you win those big deals more often at a higher value? What one thing could you do differently? That's really what we want to do on these chats to help you in your selling career. So Neil, appreciate you taking the time out.
No problem. I enjoyed that, Matt. Thank you.
Yeah, me too. Thank you very much. And thanks everybody for listening and watching. We'll see you very soon again on another chat with Matt. Stay safe and take care.